Arizona Territory, 1873. The wagon wheels creaked over dry clay as the town watched in silence, faces turned away from the woman sitting stiff-backed beside the driver. Dust kicked up around the wooden wheels, catching in the folds of her worn calico dress, and still she did not blink. Her hands were folded so tightly in her lap, her knuckles had gone white. Zinnia Keene did not cry, not when the churchwomen whispered behind her back. Not when the mayor handed her the letter with a false smile and a promise that this is for the best. And not now, as the wagon carried her eastward toward a man she had never met, sent away as a mail-order bride like she was a sack of flour nobody wanted anymore. But then the wagon jerked to a stop. The driver shouted, pulling back on the reins. What in the— Zinnia looked up. A man stood in front of the wagon, tall and broad, dust on his boots and hat pulled low over his brow. His shirt clung to him in the heat and his left hand rested on the butt of a holstered Colt. He did not move. The driver leaned out, irritated. "Mister, you best get out of the way." "No." The man's voice was calm, controlled. "She's not going." Zinnia stared at him. Her breath caught in her throat. The man stepped closer, lifting his hat from his head. His sun-browned hair was damp with sweat, and his eyes looked straight at her like he knew her. "Nash Nolan," she whispered, disbelieving. He nodded once. She had not seen him in 7 years. Not since the war ended and he left Wickenburg to chase cattle dreams somewhere north. He had been her childhood friend, her shadow in every season, and the first boy she had ever loved. But he had not written, and life had carved lines into him she did not remember. The driver leaned toward her. "You know him?" Zinnia could barely speak. "Yes." Nash turned to the driver. "She's under no contract. You have no right to take her." "The town paid for her passage," the man protested. "I will pay it back," Nash said. "Every cent." Zinnia opened the wagon door and stepped down, her shoes hitting the dirt with a soft crunch. The heat pressed down on them both, thick and still. "You should not be here," she said quietly. "I heard," Nash said. "I came back as soon as I did. You were gone 7 years. I was not ready," he admitted. "But I am now." The driver huffed and turned the wagon around, muttering about wasted time. The wheels rolled away and soon the dust settled again into silence. Zinnia stood facing him, her hands shaking now that the moment had passed. "You came back," she said. "I could not let them send you away like that," he said. "You never belonged to them." She wanted to say something sharp, something that would protect herself, but he had come. He had stood in front of a moving wagon, and in her chest something cracked open, slow and aching. "I have nowhere to go," she said. "You are coming with me," Nash said. "I have a small ranch north of here, nothing fancy, but it is mine, and it is yours if you want it." She blinked. "You are offering me a place to stay. I am offering you a life," he said. "If you still want me in it." Zinnia looked away, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She wiped them quickly. "You did not write," she said. "I did not know how," he said. "Back then I was just a boy with nothing to offer, but I never forgot you." She looked at him a long time, then nodded. "All right," she said. "Take me home." The ride to Nash's ranch took most of the day. They rode side by side on horseback, the sun dipping low behind the red rock hills. He had brought her a mare, gentle and sure-footed, and he kept glancing at her like he was afraid she might vanish if he looked away too long. The house was small, weathered wood with a porch and 2 chairs. A barn stood behind it and a corral with a few cattle. Simple. Honest. Nash helped her down from the horse and led her inside. The interior smelled of cedar and clean straw. 1 bedroom, 1 kitchen, 1 table. No signs of a woman's hand, no photographs, no keepsakes. He gestured toward a folded quilt on the bed. "You can take the room." "I will sleep in the barn." "Nash, I want you to feel safe here, Zinnia," he said. You have had enough taken from you." She looked around. Everything in her life had been decided by others, her parents dying when she was 16, the church women watching her too closely after that, the town deciding she was too strange, too quiet, too unmarried. But here she had a choice. "You do not have to sleep in the barn," she said. He gave a small nod but did not argue. That night she lay beneath the quilt, listening to the wind outside and the quiet creak of the house settling. She stared at the ceiling and thought about the way Nash had looked at her, like she mattered, like he remembered every piece of who she had been. And she wondered if maybe she had been waiting for this moment since the day he left. Morning came with a knock on the doorframe. Nash stood there, hat in his hands. "I am going into town for supplies," he said. "You need anything?" She hesitated, then stepped outside. The sun was warm on her face. "I will come with you." He did not protest. As they rode into Wickenburg, heads turned. She felt the weight of every stare, every whisper. But Nash rode tall beside her, his jaw set. When a man on the boardwalk muttered something under his breath, Nash turned and stared him down without a word. He bought her fabric, flour, coffee. He asked her what kind of tea she liked and bought both kinds, and when they passed the church, she stopped. The mayor's wife stood outside, startled to see her. "I thought you were gone," the woman said. "I was," Zinnia replied. "But I came back." Nash stepped behind her, his hand hovering near her back, not touching, just there. "You are not welcome here," the woman said coldly. "I am not here for you," Zinnia said. "I came for what is mine." Then she turned and walked away, her chin high. That night she stood beside Nash on the porch, watching the stars come out. He handed her a mug of tea without asking. "I do not know what comes next," she said quietly. "I do," he said. She turned to him. "I want you here, Zinnia," Nash said. "Not because I feel sorry for you, not because you have nowhere else to go. I want you here because I have loved you since we were children, and that has never stopped." Her breath caught. "I do not need an answer now," he said. "But I will wait as long as it takes." She looked at him, really looked. At the man he had become. The boy he once was. The space he had made for her without asking anything in return. And for the first time in years, she smiled. "I am not going anywhere," she whispered. Nash reached for her hand, and this time she let him. By the third morning, Zinnia had swept out the corners of the little cabin, washed the window panes with cloth and rainwater, and stitched new curtains from the calico Nash had bought her. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait to be told what was hers to touch. She moved through the space like someone learning to breathe again. Nash came back from mending the fence with a streak of dirt across his cheekbone and a coil of barbed wire slung over one shoulder. "You've been busy," he said, glancing toward the windows. "I needed something to do," she replied, still holding the hem of the curtain between her fingers. "I like quiet work." He hesitated in the doorway, then stepped inside, setting the wire down against the far wall. "I won't stop you from changing things. This place needs a woman's hand." "I'm not here to decorate your life," she said, not unkindly. "I'm here because you made space for me." Nash nodded, eyes steady. "And I'll keep making it." She looked at him then, really looked at the calluses on his hands, the looseness in his shoulders that hadn't been there when she first arrived. He didn't fill silence with words. He just waited, solid and sure as a stone. "I'd like a garden," she said. His mouth curved, not into a smile but something softer. "We'll fence off a plot behind the barn. Soil's rough, but I'll bring in better." "Have you ever planted anything?" "Not unless you count fence posts." She laughed, just once, quiet and surprised. That evening, she found a shovel leaning against the porch rail with a kerchief tied around the handle. Her initials stitched along the edge in familiar thread. She rubbed the cloth between her fingers and remembered a summer when they were 15, and he'd brought her wildflowers with the roots still on. She'd scolded him for killing the plant. He'd looked confused and said, "I thought you'd plant it." The next morning they worked in the dirt together. She drew lines with her finger where rows should go, and Nash dug beside her without complaint. Sweat trickled down the side of his neck, and she handed him the tin dipper without needing to be asked. "You always had a way of knowing what I needed," he said. "I used to follow you around like a stray," she said, brushing dust from her skirts. "You were the only one who never told me to hush. That's because you only spoke when it mattered." She looked up sharply, but he was already pushing another row into the earth. Later, after the seeds were sown and the sun dipped behind the ridge, they sat on the porch with their boots off and their feet aching. She leaned back against the post, her arms folded loosely across her stomach. "I dreamed once," she said, voice low, "of a place where I could hear my own thoughts without someone telling me they were wrong." Nash didn't look at her. He just reached down, pulled off his hat, and set it between them. "Well," he said, "you're here now." She didn't answer at first. Then slowly she reached out and let her hand rest over his. Not tight, not certain, but present. The next day he brought her a tin box of seeds from town. "I asked Miss Kincaid at the mercantile what grew best in dry soil," he said. "She said beans, squash, maybe some corn if you're lucky." Zinnia held the tin in both hands, the metal warm from his coat. "You asked her." "I don't know anything about growing things," he admitted, "but I want to learn." She blinked hard, then nodded once. "We'll try together." That night she didn't close the bedroom door. She left it ajar, just a crack enough for the firelight to flicker across the floorboards and for him to see that she hadn't locked him out. Nash didn't step through. He didn't speak. But when the wind kicked up and rattled the windows, she heard the slow creak of his chair on the porch, steady as a heartbeat, keeping watch. She slept with her hand curled beneath her cheek, the scent of cedar and dust in her lungs, and for the first time in years her dreams were quiet. In the days that followed, the garden grew crooked and stubborn. Birds stole the seeds. A rabbit chewed through the corner. She cursed under her breath, and Nash built a better fence. "You don't give up easy," he said. "I never learned how." He handed her a bucket of water and leaned on the post beside her. "Good." One afternoon he came back from the East Ridge with a limp. "You're hurt," she said, already moving toward him. "Stepped in a hole," he muttered. "Twisted my ankle." "Not bad." She helped him into the house without asking. He winced when she pressed the wet cloth to the swelling. She didn't speak, just worked carefully, her fingers sure. "I didn't come back just to rescue you from that wagon," he said suddenly. "I know." He looked at her, eyes sharp despite the pain. "I came back because I couldn't live another year not knowing if you were all right." Zinnia met his gaze. "I wasn't. Not until you stood there." He exhaled slowly, like something heavy had finally dropped from his chest. They didn't speak after that. She finished wrapping his ankle, tied the cloth snug, and stood. He caught her hand before she could pull away. "I won't make you promises I can't keep," he said. "I don't want promises," she replied. "I want truth." He nodded once. "Then stay," he said. She didn't answer. She just sat beside him, close enough for their knees to touch, and rested her head against his shoulder. His arm came around her without hesitation. Outside, the wind moved through the mesquite, and the porch boards creaked beneath the weight of a life beginning to settle into place. Zinnia rose before first light and stepped barefoot onto the porch. The chill clung to the hem of her nightdress, dew glistening along the rail. She breathed deep, hands wrapped around a tin mug Nash had left beside the door. The coffee inside was hot and bitter, just the way she liked it. She hadn't spoken much the day before. Neither had he, but he'd left the mug. Inside, the air still held the scent of last night's stew, and the faint warmth from the stove clung to the walls. Nash's boots were gone, but the barn door stood open against the dim gray sky. She found him bent over the water trough behind the barn, sleeves rolled, hands red from the cold. "You're up early," she said. He straightened, water dripping from his fingers. Cattle knocked the trough off its stand, had to set it right before they drank mud. She walked to his side, watching the way he pressed his weight into the job, muscles taut beneath the linen. "You always start with what's broken. Better than waiting for it to get worse." She nodded, then crouched to help him settle the post beneath the trough. Their hands brushed once rough against rough, and neither pulled away. Back inside, she ladled him a bowl of stew from the pot she'd warmed and sat across from him at the table. He ate slowly, eyes focused on the wood grain between them. "I had a letter once," she said, "from my brother before he died. He said I'd find peace in the open places if I ever got the chance." Nash set his spoon down. "Did you?" "I think I'm still looking." He sat back, arms crossed loosely. "What kind of peace do you want?" She traced a knot in the table with her fingertip. "The kind that doesn't ask me to shrink." He reached across and covered her hand with his. His palm was warm, solid. "You're not small, Zinnia, never were." She didn't answer, but she didn't pull away either. That afternoon, she walked the ridge behind the barn. The land stretched in dry rolls of earth and stone, broken only by saguaros and the occasional distant hawk. She carried a journal tucked under her arm, leather-wrapped and nearly empty. It had belonged to her mother. She sat beneath a mesquite, opened to the first blank page, and wrote one sentence. "I am not gone." Nash found her there just before dusk. He didn't speak, just eased down beside her, the sun bleeding orange across the sky. "You ever think about what you'd be if you weren't here?" she asked. He leaned back against the trunk. "Sometimes, when the nights get long. What comes to mind? I might have been a smith. I always liked the rhythm of hammer and heat, making something hold shape." She tilted her head. "There's steadiness in that. It's not far from ranching, different tools. Same patience." She turned a page in her journal, "And if everything was taken from you," he looked out across the land, "I'd start again." She closed the book. "That's why I stayed." They walked back to the house in silence, the kind that needed no filling. She carried the journal against her chest, and he matched his pace to hers, even when the trail narrowed. Inside, she lit the oil lamp and set it low. He returned from the barn with a bundle of sage and hung it by the hearth to dry. "I want to learn," he said, unprompted. She looked up. "Learn what?" "What you know. How to listen without waiting to speak, how to make things grow." She folded her arms. "That's not something you study from a book." He stepped closer. "I know. That's why I'm asking you." She watched him, the angle of his jaw different in lamplight, softer somehow. Then she reached for his hand, turned it over and pressed her palm to his. "If you want to learn," she said, "you'll need to start by sitting still." He held her gaze. "I can do that." That night she left the bedroom door wide open. Nash didn't say a word, just touched her shoulder as he passed on his way to the wash basin, his fingertips resting a moment longer than necessary. She stood at the window and looked out over the land that had become hers only because he'd made room for her in it. And as she watched the stars appear one by one, she wondered not whether she could stay but how to build something that would last. In the quiet, she heard the soft creak of floorboards behind her. He wasn't asking. He was waiting. She turned, and then she crossed the room. The first rain came in the middle of the night, soft at first, then steady. Zinnia stirred beneath the quilt, listening to the rhythm on the roof. Beside her, Nash breathed slow and even, arm resting across her waist, heavy with sleep. She didn't move. The quiet inside the house matched the hush outside, and for once, her thoughts didn't race ahead of her. When the sky lightened, she eased from the bed and pulled on her shawl. The air held the sharpness of wet earth. Outside, the ground drank greedily, and the scents of creosote and mesquite lifted into the breeze. Nash was already at the hearth when she came in from the porch, feeding the fire with careful hands. He wore yesterday's shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and his hair was damp at the temples. "I didn't mean to wake you," she said. "You didn't," he replied. "Couldn't sleep through the sound of water after waiting so long for it." She poured 2 mugs of coffee and set one beside him. "The garden'll be grateful," he nodded, watching the flames. "So will the cattle. I was starting to wonder if we'd have to drive them east come summer." Zinnia sat on the bench near the stove, mug warming her palms. "You ever take them far?" "Used to. Before I came back, I drove a herd clear up through Colorado territory." He glanced at her. "Didn't know if I'd return." She met his gaze. "What brought you back then, not just me?" He didn't answer right away. The fire popped, a small echo in the silence. "I was standing on the edge of a high plain," he said finally. "Snow all around, had a rifle in my hands and no reason to hold it. I'd sold off the last of the stock, and I had coin in my pocket, but no taste for any of it." He looked down at his hands. "I kept thinking about a girl who used to bring me dried apples in church, and how she'd sit so still when everyone else fidgeted. Thought maybe if I could find her, I'd know what mattered again." Zinnia stared into her coffee. "I never stopped wondering what happened to you." He set his mug down. "I should have come sooner." "You came when you could," she said, then added, "and you came right." A knock sounded at the door just after midday. Nash opened it to find a boy standing there, no older than 12, hat in his hands and boots muddy to the ankle. His cheeks were wind-chapped and his lips split. "Ma says to ask if you still got the tools," the boy said, eyes flicking toward Zinnia. "Pa busted the plow again." Nash didn't hesitate. "They're in the shed. Tell your ma I'll come by before sundown." The boy nodded and turned to go. Zinnia waited until the door was shut. "That the Morrow boy, Benji," Nash said. "His mother's trying to keep the place going since her husband took off last year. You help them often," he shrugged. "When they ask," she stood. "I'll bake something." "If you're going, you won't go empty-handed." He watched her cross to the cupboard. "You don't have to." "I know," she said, pulling down flour and lard. "But I want to." By the time Nash returned that evening, the rain had stopped and the sky hung low, heavy with the scent of wet stone. Zinnia waited on the porch, a shawl over her shoulders and her hands folded in her lap. He stepped up beside her, boots squelching in the damp. "They'll be all right," he said. "The boy's sharper than most grown men I've known." She nodded. "He looked at you like you were a sure thing. I hope he never learns how rare that is." They stood in silence for a while, the last light fading into the clouds. "I've been thinking," she said at last, "about what I might do here, beyond the garden." He turned toward her. "What do you want?" "I used to mend clothes for the women in town. Quiet work, but it gave me something of my own. I thought maybe I'd try again. Maybe even teach some of the younger girls if their mothers allow it." Nash rubbed his jaw. "You'd be good at that." "Better than most." She looked down at her hands. "It wouldn't be much." "It'd be yours," he said. She turned to him, the dim light catching the edge of her profile. "You'd be all right with that, me having something separate." He stepped closer, voice low. "I want you to have everything that makes you feel whole." She didn't answer with words. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers with his, and rested her head against his shoulder. The wind stirred the hem of her dress, but she didn't notice. Inside the house, the fire burned low, and the smell of rain lingered in the wood. For the first time, the space felt entirely lived in, not just by 2 people surviving, but by something beginning to root. And in the hush between words, between plans and what would come next, Zinnia let herself believe they could build not just a life, but a life that was theirs. The days turned warmer, and with the change came a slow shift in the rhythm of their lives. Zinnia found herself waking before Nash now, her hands already moving through cloth and thread before the sun had crested the ridge. The women from the outlying homesteads began sending word through their children or husbands, asking if she might take in a hem or mend a sleeve. She set aside a small basket by the hearth, where garments waited in quiet piles. She didn't charge at first. That came later when a woman named Ruth Dobbins pressed 3 coins into her hand and said, "For your time, not your charity." Zinnia had nodded, but her fingers closed around the coins like they were more than just silver. Nash, true to his word, gave her space. But he also started coming in from the fields a little earlier, his shirt damp at the collar, eyes drawn to the way her hands moved with such care over a needle. One evening, as she worked by lamplight, he leaned against the doorframe and watched without speaking. "You're staring," she murmured, not looking up. "I didn't know hands could move like that," he said. "I stitched my own dresses from the time I was 12. It was either that or wear what didn't fit. You've always made do." She set the garment aside, brushing her palms against her skirts. "Not anymore. I'm not surviving now, Nash. I'm choosing." He crossed the room in 2 slow steps and knelt beside her chair, his palm resting lightly on her knee. "I know, and that means everything." She touched his jaw with the backs of her fingers, the stubble catching against her skin. "You never ask for anything, not even this." "I figured if I was patient enough, you'd give it when you wanted to." "I do," she whispered. Their lips met in the hush between words, the kind of kiss that didn't rush, didn't ask. When he pulled back, her breath stayed close to his. "You're the only man I've ever wanted," she said. He stood and helped her to her feet, guiding her hand to his chest. "Then stay beside me, for all of it." Zinnia didn't hesitate. "I already have." The next week, they rode into town together, dusty and sun-worn, her hair braided down her back, his hand resting loosely on her thigh as they rode double. At the mercantile, she placed an order for bolts of muslin and a spool of blue thread. Nash pointed out a small iron kettle in the corner, the kind her mother used to cook over when they'd lived in the high desert. "You want it?" he asked. "I want a life built slow," she said, "with the things that last." He bought the kettle without another word. Outside, the mayor's wife passed by, mouth pinched tight, flanked by 2 other women. They paused when they saw Zinnia, but she didn't look away. Instead, she nodded once, polite and even, and turned to Nash. "I'm ready. Let's go home." Back at the ranch, she hung the kettle on its hook over the fire and filled it with water from the barrel. Nash stood behind her, watching the way her shoulders moved as she worked. "I want to marry you," he said. She turned slowly, eyes searching his. "You sure?" "I've never been more certain of anything, not even cattle prices." She smiled, the kind that reached the corners of her eyes. "All right." They married a week later, just the 2 of them and Ruth Dobbins, who brought a loaf of bread and a hymn book. Zinnia wore a soft gray dress she'd sewn herself, and Nash shaved for the first time in months, though he nicked his chin in the process. They stood beneath the cottonwood at the edge of the creek, hands clasped, and made their vows without flourish. "I don't want promises," she said, her voice steady. "Just the truth of you, every day," he answered. "Then I'll give you that for as long as I breathe." That night, they lay wrapped in the quilt she'd stitched from the scraps of her old dresses, the window open to the sound of crickets and the scent of sage. Nash kissed the hollow of her throat and held her like he'd never let go. Seasons shifted. The garden grew strong. Zinnia taught 3 girls from nearby homesteads how to sew, and when one of them brought her a ripped sleeve and asked, "Can you show me how to fix it?" she said yes, and meant it. Nash built a second room onto the house with his own hands, and when she asked why, he said, "For what comes next." She didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. By the following spring, a cradle sat near the hearth. Not store-bought. Nash had carved it from pine, smoothing the wood until it shone. Zinnia lined it with soft muslin and laid a single folded blanket inside. On a warm morning in early May, with dandelions blooming wild along the fence line, Zinnia gave birth to a daughter. She labored in the same bed where she'd once lain awake, wondering if she had a place in the world. Now that question had been answered in full. Nash held the child in his arms and said, "She's got your hands." Zinnia, pale and spent, smiled faintly. "Then she'll be strong." Their days settled into a rhythm made of small things, bare feet on cool floorboards, baby laughter echoing through the house, the creak of the porch swing under a western sky. At dusk, Zinnia fed the chickens while Nash chopped wood. Some evenings, they shared a quiet supper with Ruth or the Morrow boy, now nearly grown. They didn't speak in grand declarations. Their love lived in the way he checked the door latch twice before bed, and how she pressed his shirts with care, even when he said he didn't mind the wrinkles. It was in the hush that fell between them, full of knowing. And when their daughter took her first steps between them, wobbly and wide-eyed, it was Zinnia who caught her and Nash who steadied them both. They built a life not out of what had been taken, but what they chose to give. And when the wind moved through the grass and the sun lit the ridge with gold, they stood side by side, hands clasped, hearts full, knowing they had made something lasting together. Always.